Okay, well, welcome to Tuesday, May 7th for our policy committee meeting. And we have a whole host of policies. So we are just going to jump right in. We, as always, have policies for our first reading. And today we have policy 902. The purpose of this policy is to provide guidelines for community use of school facilities and equipment. And the name of the policy is Use of School District Facilities and Equipment. And as we review this policy, we also will be deleting then old 1000 series 1130, 1130.1 R regulation, 1130.2 R regulation, 1130.3 regulation, and 1130.4 R regulation. And further down in the agenda, we have a regulation that will go with this policy and replace these regulations, and it's 902R Facility Use Guide. And so I'm just going to ask if we can first review the policy, but then we'll also, for your time, do the regulation rather than waiting till the rest of our agenda. Does that work for you? Okay, great. So if Jeremy and Denise, you want to come on up and introduce yourselves, and again, welcome. And do you want to just walk through the policy, or do you want us to just ask questions? How should we proceed?
I can introduce myself. I'm Jeremy Rupp. I'm the district-wide community education coordinator. The district-wide community education coordinator. Turn it on. Oh, green means go. Jeremy Rupp. I'm the community education district-wide coordinator and oversee 10 programs in Duluth, Minnesota. And Danielle Tukalski here is our facilities use coordinator, an amazing human, and has done some amazing work on this policy. You want to just talk about it?
I'm happy to go through it, and we can kind of look at those changes that were brought up. Again, my name is Danielle Tukalski, facilities use coordinator for the district as part of community education. So with policy 902, we are taking the guideline that was put out by Minnesota School Board Association and kind of just making slight changes in some language that would fit what we felt worked best for Duluth Public Schools. That's shown in the highlighted parts, and then there are a couple strikeouts just with some, like I said, that language. In the policy, as we kind of go through, in the section about general community use of school facilities, it is section 4. In the subsection B, there was some language clarification that we thought would help make it a little bit easier for individuals reading the policy to know where to go for information. So instead of saying that the request would go through the school district administrative office, we changed that to community education office because we are the kind of holders of that responsibility, and we would have the answers a lot quicker than someone trying to chase around looking for the answers. We also changed the word administration to district when it comes to present recommendation procedures for the processing and review of requests. We felt this word had a little bit more meaning towards the different departments in the district, because there are sometimes instances where those in the child nutrition office would know a lot more than I on what we should be doing in that area. So the district seemed like a better word than just administration. In the next subsection, it brings up the idea of school board. The school board may require a rental fee for school facilities. As of right now, we do not require a lot of fees for much of the use here in the district. And what use is subject to fees is incredibly inconsistent. It is all across the board. There's really no rhyme or reason into what we're doing right now, and it's brought up a lot of concerning looks over which groups are required to pay versus those that are not. And so in this section, we wanted to make sure that it was very clear that fees could be required for groups using the facilities, but also namely making sure that the costs of custodial technicians, so auditorium technicians is the biggest one there, as well as food service technicians and supervisory services if necessary, and that fee may also be reviewed and adjusted annually because things are constantly changing and the needs of the district and the community are constantly changing. So we felt that language would allow us to match that. A rental fee schedule was another thing that will also be a big conversation going forward if this policy is passed, to help make sure that across the board we're being fair and just and equitable in what we are asking for fees going forward. When looking back on some previous invoices, it's quite apparent that this system is broken. And so that was a big push for this policy to make sure that we are looking through and matching what we're saying, and it's very clear to the community what we're asking as well.
I just want to jump in and add to what Danielle's saying. So historically, in community education, we had an East and a West and enrichment coordinator that were doing facilities use permitting on top of their job. Danielle's position is new to the district as of about 6 months ago. And one of her main charges has been to systematize and optimize our facilities use programming. And so some of the findings that she's brought to light are part of the reason why she was hired. And that's been very helpful into kind of like moving this policy forward. So while she's highlighting some of the discrepancies that may exist historically, those discrepancies were more a result of not having a streamlined process. And that's part of what the district has done to resolve this in hiring Danielle.
Excellent. Going further, the next subsection that we have adopted a little bit from the Minnesota School Board Association was adding a section E, and this would lay out the group classification and priority list. This is a common practice across districts, making sure it is very clear who would be subject to fees versus not, and then those who are subject to fees on a different type of scale. So that way nonprofits are being looked at a little bit differently than commercial groups in what is being asked of them. The first class is very pretty clear. It is all 709 district groups. So these are classrooms, these are school clubs, these are teams, our professional development, all of our community education programs, all 10 of those, making sure that they have that priority to the spaces that are homed here, but they are also not subject to fees unless they are requiring an extension of someone's time or skills. A big common one for this is custodial overtime. So if a group wants to meet outside of a contracted time, that does occur a fee at times. So there is that ability to charge those groups with proper notice. All the other classes would then be subject to fees based on a fee schedule that would be adopted by the school board. And it also helps with our priorities. So our facilities are in hot demand. They are very popular, especially our gym spaces, especially because there are not very good community spaces outside the district. So when we have 12 different groups vying for that space, it's really important for us to have a very clear line of who has that priority and how we are able to distinguish which groups are allowed in first and then go down from there. This does encapsulate all of our area athletic associations, the ones that are often really competing for that space, as well as some of the nonprofit groups in town. And this helps them specifically in Duluth, and it is listed with at least a 70% of our district resident participations. So that way, if there was a nonprofit, let's say from Solon Springs, Wisconsin, or a different area, that would be outside of that 70% residents, and they would have less priority to our Duluth residents. So this further clears that up. And as we go, it just opens up more and more of where those groups lie. We have never had a comprehensive list like this. It was just general characterizations. So there was often a lot of confusion, especially when I came into this role of how do we decide who gets what. So this was just expanding on that, making it as clear as possible so that way we can communicate the best we can. The only other change that we've really added to the original Minnesota School Board Association policy 902 is in the rules for use of facilities and equipment. And this is what I think is one of the most important aspects of this policy, because not only does it talk about using our facilities and our equipment with respect, but also holding them responsible for that. It is a great cost to cover broken nets, broken volleyball courts, broken technology equipment, and it is a cost that weighs heavy on the district. So making sure that it is very clear that while using our equipment in our spaces, we ask for respect, and we also ask for looking out for that space and being responsible for those damages. And some of the ways that we can do that is through liability insurance. And this can be looked at in two different ways to help folks. One is making sure that organizations have liability insurance and a certificate of insurance covering up to $1 million of coverage. These are our larger groups that are using the spaces quite often and usually have their own liability insurance to start off with. But we also have been working with our lawyers to write up a waiver. So that way when we have smaller community groups, the one that I think of is currently Longville tennis courts are going to be shutting down, and those are many community members that now have nowhere to play tennis. We have beautiful courts at Laura MacArthur that they would like to use, but we can't expect individuals to have $1 million liability insurance policy. Just take it out, no big deal. So this waiver would allow them to use our facilities without that added barrier to of trying to find $1 million policy. And then it also protects the district from any damages and claims against the district. So that's what is added in onto that section as well.
And because of the facility permit use process, we know who's still there and when they're there.
Thank you for your detailed work on this. And I was looking through the regulation as well. I was trying to find if there was any place where we have any statement or outline of, as far as making sure that the organization has any sort of philosophical alignment with what we do. I mean, I'm just thinking of, could you have like a tobacco company want to hold a meeting on how to get kids to smoke tobacco, for instance? I'm just trying to think of do we have any safeguards in for such things? And maybe that's a free speech thing that we can't put something in, but I was just wondering if there's any sort of language there.
There's no direct language saying that we would ask those groups not to use the spaces, but there is plenty of language that says that the school board and district has full right to refuse any group from use of the facilities. So perhaps that came down to, if, using your example, a tobacco company were to come, we would make that decision as a district of allowing that group or not, and we hold that ability to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, so, yeah, excellent review and changes. I liked how you tailored section E to Duluth Public Schools. That was really excellent and comprehensive, and like you said, it'll make it easier for outside groups who are looking to kind of see where they fall as they make their request. Did any board members have any questions on the policy 902? Member.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of this. I'm curious, perhaps this is more in the regulation, but we don't talk very specifically of how a permit might be revoked or even the day of. When I look at the former policy that we'll be deleting, 1130, there's a statement saying that building principal, community education coordinator, coordination with the building engineer would make a final determination of adequacy of supervision of the group that's there. And if supervision is determined to be inadequate by an agent of the school district, the use permit may be revoked. And so that language is not in this updated policy. And so I'm just curious if we need to make sure that we have something specific that we can ask you to leave if things aren't being followed.
Sure. Yeah, it is not stated in 902. It is in the regulations.
In the regulations, I noticed that it's specific to disorderly conduct. People can be asked to leave. And we refer to a couple other policies, like our tobacco use policy, weapons policy, and I forget what the other one. And within those policies, there's, people are asked to leave if they're breaking those laws or rules. But I was just wondering if from like a covering ourselves to be able to say, like, in the middle of an event, this is no longer like meeting our expectations, this needs to be over, like if we needed to have something in there to allow us to do that more specifically.
Absolutely. I am a big fan of clear is kind. Jeremy has taught me that. So that's something I think we could add in, especially if it's not clearly labeled elsewhere. So
Is that something we need to talk with lawyers about, Superintendent Megas, or is
We
it?
could.
And we do, so each time somebody submits a use for facilities, Danielle reviews it. And if there is an instance or an issue and they submit for another facility use permit, Danielle reviews it. And so I would say that while the language that you're suggesting and kind of like the idea that you're putting forward, I think that sounds great. I would also say that there is that as a safety mechanism, so.
Right, there's a lot of
Yeah.
proactive.
Yeah, and when you
just
talk about like
training
an
and
event
screening.
going on and, for us to be able to say like, well, this isn't working out for us at this time. At the moment, one of the things, so community education is by its nature and by its policy and stature a revenue generator. One of the ideas of, we're one of the very few districts that don't have a very specific and detail-oriented kind of facilities use fee schedule. That's kind of what Danielle's putting forward here. And part of what they use those fees for sometimes are what we call building managers. And as we're working to comprehensively build our community education programming as well as possible, that's one of the things that we're also looking into too. So if you engage in that conversation and we're not perhaps at the table when you have that conversation, know that kind of building manager is a direction that we're heading to be able to be able to provide that type of support at a building level.
Great, thank you.
Are you suggesting, Member Michaelsell, that having that in, though, might not only offer clarity to people, but also kind of set the expectation? And I'm just wondering, when you were researching this and looking at other districts, did they have something more specific either in the policy or the regulation related to that?
not specifically. A lot of the districts that I was researching have adopted the 902 from the Minnesota School Board Association and did very similar to what we did. Quite many of them just had what the Minnesota School Board Association put out and no other changes.
Yep.
And the ones that I did see that had the changes inspired me to put in the clear language on what group is where and what class level they are at. But I didn't see any changes specific to that in the other districts.
Symbiotic to that too, many districts, most of the ones that I've looked into that Danielle's looked into have building site managers too. So again, it's one of the safety stops that other districts use.
Member Mikesell, can you point me to the line you're referring to in 1130?
Yeah, 1 second.
Sorry, reading it with the strike through is
Right.
difficult for my old eyes right
Oh,
now.
that's right, I do have it here. don't I? So it's the last paragraph of 1130, general use of school facilities. And that paragraph starts with school facilities will be available for use on the weekends or holidays. And then the last two sentences are what I'm referring to.
Perfect, thank you.
I'm wondering if, this is the first reading, so we can make changes for a second reading. If you'd want to kind of review some language maybe around that for us to consider, and maybe see if there's other language that might be out there, I guess. And then I had a question about, does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay, because again, this is the first reading. On 4C, where you talked about the fees being reviewed and adjusted, when do you expect to kind of, or when are you looking at bringing something forward with fees?
We just had a conversation this morning about when that might be, when it might make sense and when we should be adjusting this. And the conversation was July 1st,
Okay, okay.
implementing that.
So would that come back to us then to approve, right? Before July 1st?
That
and-
fee schedule
yeah,
would be.
okay.
Yes.
And then that would be
We'd
ready
always bring
for
it.
this fall and,
Correct.
and any conversations you're having. Okay, great.
And to that point, we're looking and talking and considering and modeling out how to do that most equitably.
Yeah.
Making sure that we're supporting our communities and their capacity to use our facilities. One of the fundamental charges of community education is by state law to maximize the use of facilities within a district. And so we want to make sure that we're not being restrictive to anybody in that. And so we have some financial models that we're currently playing with. Even Danielle and I were talking a little bit earlier about what that might look like, but yeah.
So our current brochure that we have posted, that will be replaced come July?
Yes.
Is the goal? Okay, got it, thank you.
And then, was this, in terms of getting input from other staff in the district, particularly, I think of our activities directors, was this reviewed with them in any way, just out of curiosity?
In bits and pieces. So we've never sat down with me and Sean and me and Tom to go line by line in here, but definitely talking about what needs to be happening in the gym, the fields, and bringing in from all of those conversations has then influenced what has been put in front of you today. But we have not sat down specifically, like I said, and went over every single thing. They do have access to it, and talking with Sean Road yesterday, I believe he read it, but we were talking about it.
So,
Sorry.
I wonder just for respect, because of, I know what their roles are, and they generally get hit with a lot of questions around facilities, if we should get feedback from them before the second reading as well.
yes, I would say that's our intention. We need to make sure that for a variety of reasons, we want them to look at it, to make sure that we have consistent practice and a clear shared mental model of how we want to operate moving forward. But I think that makes sense, and we can accomplish that well before the second reading.
Happy to do that. Our jurisdictions are slightly different between activities, athletic directors, and community education. I would say that our main overlap is in using permits for the buildings. And one of the determinations that was made corporately by community education is that we, as a district, need to move to everybody making sure that they're permitting, because in the OST, the out-of-school time, should an unfortunate situation arise or whatever, having building permits lets us know exactly who's in the building and where they are. And so that would be the main overlap that we would have with ADs, is making sure that, because they have their own capacity to do their own scheduling, we use our scheduler, which is shared information between them and us. But that would be the main overlap, and we're happy to talk with them about the rest of the policy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate all your work on this.
Yeah, and I also, I guess and I appreciate and understand what you're saying, Jeremy, just again, knowing they see the practical side sometimes.
Absolutely.
On the boots on the ground, so to speak, or.
It's a quid
the
pro
tennis
quo.
shoes on the ground, just maybe they have some additions as well, particularly with the regulation piece as well. In terms of the policy itself, though, Member Williams, did you have anything, questions on this? Again, this is a model policy, and we are going to look at the regulation, which is later down on the agenda after we look at the policy, because they're presenting for both.
Thank you for excusing my tardiness. The questions that I had have been asked and/or answered, so I'm good so far. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so jumping in then to just the regulation, did you want to kind of walk us through and highlight any parts of this? Okay, great, thank you so much.
So this was modeled off of a couple other districts in the state that had a very similar setup, and it was the go-to information piece. And what this document has done is all of the other regulations that we're looking to get rid of have been brought into here and then updated from 1998 to 2024. So there, in the old policies, there was some positions that don't exist anymore or are called something different. So some of that has been changed. And going through here, it does start off with policy 902, making sure everyone is on the same page for what that does mean. And then it goes into the processes and procedures for scheduling those facilities and our district and community asks and expectations. In the process and procedures for scheduling, this is a way to make sure that the information is right away in the beginning if people have questions. We do use an online application form, so getting away from the carbon paper copies that have been used in the past. They get lost and sometimes mixed up where they're supposed to be going. And so this creates a common place that everyone can find right from the district website. And it asks all the information we need in order to create a permit.
And you can come into the district and fill it out if you have any issues with online access or whatever. We'll gladly sit down with you at our computer and fill that out.
Correct. And it does go on to ask for a little bit of time in when those requests are submitted. It is very hard to turn around and get a request in one day and contact the people you need to contact to make sure the space is available and a permit put out within 24 hours. So we've made it pretty clear that we were asking for 5 days in advance. And a lot of the additional information, so the permit holders being 18, that is from the previous regulations as well. So bringing some of that information along with. There's another section about insurance. This, at least in the 6 months that I've been in this position, has come up a lot. So again, wanting to make sure that it is very clear what our expectations are and that we are able to protect ourselves in the worst case scenario. The right of refusal. So this is similar to what was brought up earlier, reserving the right to cancel any reservations so that should the district needs arise, as well as making sure that we have the priority, making sure our clubs and our teams are taken care of. It has tax exempt status. This was also taken from previous regulations. The invoice payment is making sure that those invoices are being paid. When I've looked through some past invoices just from 2020 to 2024, there were over $140,000 of unpaid invoices. And that's a lot of basketball nets that could have been replaced. So having very clear language about what we're expecting with those invoices and when those invoices should be paid. The community use rules and regulations was a combination of all sorts of pieces from the prior regulations. There really was not many changes I've made or added in because I felt those regulations were very good. And it was a great way to show what we expect of community users and making sure that our facilities are protected and our staff, as well as some of the pieces of information that we find most troublesome. Propping doors is one of the biggest ones, making sure that is very clear. We do not need any more squirrels coming in or anything like that, but also for the safety and security of the building. Other ones in there talking about those special use areas, it briefly mentions here, but then it goes into detail further on into the guidelines. The cancellations and no-shows, equipment use, and custodial services was also taken from prior regulations and put into here. The District 709 policies and procedures, the only changes made here that were very big was just updating what policies it was referencing. Some of the old policies were referenced, and so just making sure that was all updated with what the district does have now. But other than that, I do not believe there was any other changes that I can recall. The next section is, again, that priority list and classification, similar, the exact same that was put into policy 902. And then it goes into the special use areas. So in the prior regulations, it had some of this, but it did not match specifically to what we have now and what we ask of certain places. So with the swimming pools, making sure we're up to date with safety for participants, but also making sure the lifeguard information was still correct, and the objects that are coming into the pool, making sure that all still matched, and also with common lifeguard practices, making sure that was all still good. Some of the largest changes happened in the kitchen and cafeteria areas, along with food sales and concessions. This was a very big section that was incredibly outdated. So there was a lot of discussions with child nutrition, Sheila Oak, and making sure that what was put in here matches what is not only in line with the district ideas that she has and what we do as common practice, but also with Minnesota state laws and St. County safe food and health laws. So there was a lot of really great discussion with those individuals, both at the state and county level, making sure that we were within line of what is allowed, especially when it came to things like bake sales. So there's a whole section on bake sales. There was a request for a fundraising bake sale to happen in the district, and that kind of really sparked a lot of this. And there are restrictions, and we need to make sure that those are being adhered to. And it kind of went also with the concessions. So me and Sean Rode worked a lot on the concessions piece together, because we see that a lot with booster clubs wanting to run their own concession stands, as well as dance organizations who have their dance shows. They want to run theirs. And we also have to make sure that the district concession stands are being looked after as well. So we worked with the state to make sure that Minnesota Department of Health to see what actually is allowed when it comes to concession stands. There's not very clear language just to research. So we worked with our sanitarian to make sure that we were meeting all of the expectations and all of the rules. And so putting in that there will have to be a special events food stand license going forward for anyone holding a concession stand that is not our own, because our own fall under a different category. The regular school libraries is short, but we are hoping that down the line we'll be able to address it a little bit more. Both the media specialists at both high schools have been shown this, and I have not received any additional updates, but I expect that there will be something that comes along down the line that maybe they will think of. Industrial arts, school grounds, and athletic fields and gymnasiums have been conversations with custodial staff as well as other facilities staff, making sure that still checks out and everything seems to be correct for what they need. The final two sections, there's the buildings and locations in case someone is unaware of where these places are, if they're trying to figure out where they would like to host their events. And then the last page is, again, from the Minnesota School Board Association with those meeting restriction dates, the most current one that we have right now.
Okay, excellent. And this, again, the regulation really is meant to be more informational, but, and this is really such a thorough handbook, and I think we all recognize that as we put things into practice too, you may come back and say, we want to add some things or you know, review it. And,
Exactly.
and that certainly can happen. I had one question. I was just curious. Let me see, where is that question? Oh, it was on page, the process and procedures for scheduling, where it says the right of refusal. I'm just wondering, should that be bolder, if you will? Because I know that that sometimes has been problematic, right? Where we need to say, and so I was just curious if that should stand out a little bit more, but
In font or in wording, or both?
I don't know. That would be up to you. I just wondering.
A great
I guess.
recommendation.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, I guess. Any other questions on the regulation in the handbook?
I have a quick question, or a couple quick questions. Under the kitchen and cafeteria area, it talks about the child nutrition personnel shall be reimbursed at a rate of pay determined by the school board. I was just curious, is that going to be a per event determination, or is it something that's already included in their contracts, like what their rate of pay would be?
It's one of the fees that would be on the fee schedule. So if you have a copy of the prior brochure, there is a personnel fee section, and it would be put in there based on that rate. I believe it would come from their,
Okay, and so if we approve this every year or so often, then that is us approving what their salary would be at
Yes.
that time? Okay. And then I noticed, not in a previous regulation, was that potluck-style foods and events will not be allowed. That's also under the kitchen, cafeteria, food sales, and concessions. I'm thinking of teams that have like spaghetti dinners and host those at the schools. Is this regulation now saying that they would not be able to do that?
that came from the sanitarium at the state, and I do believe so. I could get another interpretation from that, from the sanitarium, to clear up that specific example, to make sure, because that is a big part of booster clubs. And
Yeah, that would be a major change in practice and in tradition and culture, and obviously if there's reasons for it not to be, then we need to have a better understanding and have better notice. But if that's something that's related more to food sales or other things and wouldn't necessarily impact teams or clubs having a communal dinner together on school property, then I feel like we need to make sure that that's still an available option for them if possible.
sure, yeah, there is a potluck-specific information sheet from the state. I'll have to pull that up again, and I can even bring it in during the second reading as well.
Great. The other question I had was under school grounds and athletic fields, which is towards the end. It says professional content shall not be, or professional contests shouldn't be played on school athletic fields or playgrounds without school board approval. And I know that like the Twins aren't coming up every weekend to like practice or play. But is there a process already established for how a school board would approve those kind of requests?
I believe so. The only example that I think I've seen, at least, has been Duluth FC, and they play at East Stadium. Community education does not oversee the stadium use. That's with the athletic directors, but I believe Sean should have some sort of policy on that, or how that is done.
Okay.
But that is the only professional team and example that I've seen so far.
Another question I had, which actually was part of the policy, but it's also in here, there's an asterisk behind community education programming on the classification priority list, and I wasn't sure what the asterisk was indicating there.
Where,
So if you're looking at the regulations, the very beginning, when it talks about what our current, what the 902 policy is, but then also, it's also in the 902 proposed policy. When you look under class 1 for the group classification and priority list.
I believe that's just a typo.
Okay,
There should not be an asterisk there.
got it.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't sure with libraries, if the language should be updated to media center and media specialists? Or do we still have people who are called librarians and that's their classification?
I think media specialist would be a more current term, so we should update that between now and the second reading. Thanks for catching that.
Yep.
I actually wondered that about the industrial arts facility. Is it still called that? I was thinking it wasn't, but I could be wrong.
Move to CTE?
Maybe, I was going to say career and technical education facilities.
Those are very easy and good changes,
Yeah.
so.
Thank you for your work on this.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Are there any other questions or comments either on the regulation or policy 902? Okay, great. Thank you so much for your work on this. Thank you so much for just walking us through it and also listening to the comments and some thoughts on maybe additions, so.
It's been a team effort to get here, so it's going to continue to be a team effort to make sure it's right, so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
great feedback.
Yeah, thank you. We have great facilities. That was one of the things when we did our long-range facilities plan, is that we wanted our community to really engage in our facilities in many different ways, so thank you. Okay, so now we got all those regulations that we'll be deleting again, along with this policy. And so now we're going to go to some of the 205. And I just wanted to say, when we were doing the planning, like we talked about last month, about the 200 series, because it is school board policies, we do have an opportunity to go through a lot of them fairly quickly, and some of them are ones that really make sense for us to review every year, frankly, like the Code of Ethics. So we do have quite a few here, and our goal was to try and get all of the 200 series reviewed in 2024. So we do have some more coming up that we didn't get to this month, but we've got a chunk here. So the first one is 205, open meetings and closed meetings. And the purpose of the school board embraces accountability and transparency in the conduct of its business, in the belief that openness produces better programs, more efficient administration of programs, and an organization more responsive to public interest and less susceptible to private interest. The school board shall conduct its business under a presumption of openness. At the same time, the school board recognizes and respects the privacy rights of individuals as provided by law. The school board also recognizes that there are certain exceptions to the Minnesota open meeting law as recognized in statute, where it has been determined that in limited circumstances, the public interest is best served by closing a meeting of the school board. B, the purpose of this policy is to provide guidelines to assure the rights of the public to be present at school board meetings while also protecting an individual's right to privacy under law, and to close meetings when the public interest so requires as recognized by law. And again, a lot of state statutes apply to this, and we may see state statutes changing sometimes with different policies like this one, and this is a new school board policy. So any questions or comments on that? We really did not make any recommendations for changes on this one.
I had questions that were just technical in terms of process and just trying to determine if we need to update some of the wording to match if we have a process already in place. So in section 4A2, it's under special meetings, I believe. It talks about, posting on a principal bulletin board within the district. Do we have a principal bulletin board? Right out there, okay.
When you come in our entrance,
Yeah.
that schedule of meetings that is posted in the glass area,
Got
that
it.
is our
Okay,
our posting.
because the wording on that, if I remember correctly, was kind of like, well, you could have it here, or you could have it here, depending on what you have. If we have a principal bulletin board, we can just say it's going to be in the principal bulletin board.
Yep.
And it does state that if you read into it, or on the door of the school board's usual meeting room, if there is no principal bulletin board. So
Right,
that's really kind of what we're doing in practice.
okay. So we can even take out that second statement if we are doing it in the first?
I think that because this is so tied to state law, we don't want to mess with very much wording on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question I had then was just curiosity. Further down in that special meetings, there it talks about a procedure for a member of the public to request notice of special meetings. And then I think letter E talks about establishing the expiration date from when that request would expire, and the school board having to send a notice of that expiration to anyone who's requested those special notices. And I just wanted to know if that's something that we're doing, and do we have a process for that? And are we notifying when those expire? Sorry.
Under 4. 4, 2 special meetings, E. Go
I
ahead.
can answer as far as the notices. We do, all special meetings have to be posted 3 days prior, and we've always followed that guideline. I also have, every week, we publish our schedule of meetings, and if people have requested in the past that they want that publication, I have a huge email list that goes out to. As far as the expiration date on requests, that I'm not sure if we're currently doing, because that doesn't sound familiar to me. But if someone has requested to be taken off the list, I take them off. So I don't know if that helps, and I can look more into that, E, to see and get clarification about what that means through MSBA. But I don't think we're missing anything that we're supposed to be doing. We are following the legal requirements when it comes to special meetings, closed meetings, regular meetings, as far as notifying the public. We've been very transparent
Absolutely.
about notifying people and publishing it and all that. I think we go even beyond what we need, what's required by law, so.
I would also say with this policy, as you can see, there's many state statutes and legal references, as well as if you look down that list, you'll see changes often that come from legal changes on this as well. And certainly, our School Board Association puts out a lot of information on open meeting laws, a lot of trainings around it at our conferences, as well as just special trainings around it. And so I do encourage, especially new school board members, to participate in as many of those trainings as you can for just background information as well. But any other questions specific to 205? Okay. Then we will move, again, this is a first reading of 205. 207, also new policy, and it's public hearings. The purpose, the school board recognizes the importance of obtaining public input on matters properly before the school board during a public hearing. The purpose of this policy is to establish procedures to efficiently receive public input. And this is for public hearings, which is different than policy 206, even though there is some overlap. So any questions on, and it does cross-reference with policy 206. Any questions on public hearings? Some of the times we've used public hearings have been for the sale of property.
Yeah, I appreciate how it lines out where we're required by law to hold public hearings and what issues those are, because that's helpful.
I also think, because sometimes these issues, when they're at hand, can be potentially contentious, it's nice to have it laid out so clearly, especially some of the things related to just manner of speaking and you know, not having personal attacks and things like that. I think it's important, having been in some hearings that get a little more interesting.
And just for informational, I remember when I was fairly new on the board and we had a hearing dealing with the sale of Central, and we actually involved the League of Women Voters to moderate it so that, and then we read the civility code and we really kind of set it up so it was, it followed all of the policies around public hearing, but we just added a few layers as well, so. Okay, okay, any questions? Okay, then we'll move, again, first reading, and then the next policy, 211, again, is a new policy, criminal or civil action against school district, school board member, employee, or student. The purpose of this policy is to provide guidance about the school district's position, rights, and responsibilities when a civil or criminal action is pending against the school district or a school board member, school district employee, or student. And again, all of the legal references are referred to, as well as cross-references with a number of our other model policies in the 400 and 500 series. Any questions on this one?
I'm curious if anyone has a good explanation of why this would be housed in the school board section of policies and not like in employees or in students, because it's, you know, each one of those classes of individuals is named.
Just a guess might be because, like in many ways, the school board is seen as kind of the, one of the entities that must exist. You know, the school district has to have a school board and it has to have a superintendent, and the other employees and structures below are set up through administration. Maybe because because the school board is also listed as like an employee group, that's why they house it here. But that would just be a guess, but I could probably talk to Terry Morrow or somebody else from MSBA.
I mean, it has to be housed somewhere,
Yeah.
right? I was just curious if, when this policy is having to be looked at for some reason, if it would be more easily found in another location, if it's being, just want to make sure that people are able to find it when they need it. And if they're
Yeah.
not thinking to look in the school board area,
True.
because it's affecting a different, you know, group of people or person, they might not necessarily know where to track it down at.
One might think if you're splitting it, maybe there should be a separate policy in each of the categories too. But I mean, you could do an employee or school board criminal and civil action policy, and then an employee one and a student one, but we could talk with MSBA between now.
Just to find out their rationale for putting it here, but, you know, obviously, we're included in that list, as well as, again, there's a number of cross-references with policy 403, 406, 408, 414, 506, 515, which fall under, you know, other series, or other categories, so we can find that out for informational purposes. Would you want to, Patty, follow up with Terry on that? Okay, great. Thank you. So then policies for second reading, we have 201. And again, 201 was a new policy that we reviewed last month, and we did have a couple deletions. But as we said last month, we were going to put some more time into this policy and see if were other 8,000 and 9,000 series we could delete. So we did that. And part of how we did that was by looking at other school districts and what they added to the model policy from NSBA. And doing that, The changes that you see in front of you are 5, where we talk about elections, and we had included it in here, and then also terms of office. And in both of those, we had some other 8,000 or 9,000 series. And then we also changed the powers and duties, and again, based on looking at some other policies, so you'll see some additions and renumbering under that section. And then the rest really remain the same. So we added to it, we didn't take away under the powers and the duties. And so that is 201. And you can see, again, I forgot to read the purpose. The purpose is the care, legal status of the school board. The care, management, and control of the schools is vested by statutory and constitutional authority in the school board. The school board shall carry out the mission of the school district with diligence, prudence, and dedication to the ideals of providing the finest public education. The purpose of this policy is to define the authority, duties, and powers of the school board in carrying out its mission. And then it has a general statement of the policy. And with these additions that we added, it did allow us again to delete 8,000, 8,005, 8060, 9005, 9010, 9115, and 9090. So any comments or questions on those changes? We had made a couple changes in the first reading underneath the organizational and membership section where we changed it to 7 elected members, which was A. Any additional comments or underneath that? It sure felt good to be able to review those 8,000 and 9,000 series and remove them and make a more complete policy under the legal status of the school board. Any other comments? Questions? Thank you so much, Patty, for taking our suggestions and putting them all in the right places, okay? Really appreciate that, okay? Then the next policy is 203, operation of the school board governing rules. The purpose of this policy is to provide governing rules for the conduct of meetings of the school board. And goes over rules of order, which is, again, state statute. And then we talked about Robert's Rules of Order, the latest edition, and we talked about this a bit when we reviewed it last month. Any comments on this one? Okay. We all agreed we're using the latest edition of the Robert's Rules of Order. Right, okay. Then 203.1, school board procedures, rules of order. Let me see here. The purpose of this policy is to provide specific rules of order to conduct meetings of the school board. And it's more, again, the way we facilitate the meetings, and you'll see the legal references and the cross-references on that one. Any questions on that one? Okay, and then 203.6, consent agenda. And as we talked about last time too, this was to really kind of bring this into the practice that we've been doing the last couple years. 203.6 consent agenda. The purpose of this policy is to allow the use of the consent agenda, and walks you through that and the cross-references with the other policies of NSBA. Any comments or questions on that one? Okay. And then policies for review, and just again, policies for review often are, if there's no changes that we want to recommend, or minor changes. And so the first one is 209 Code of Ethics. The purpose of this policy is to assist the individual school board members in understanding his or her role as part of a school board and in recognizing the contribution that each member must make to develop an effective and responsible school board. And we had reviewed and revised it, or reviewed it in 2022. So we're kind of ahead of the game, but as I mentioned, we wanted to get all of the 200 series in this year. And this is a good one to be reviewing, and I think we've reviewed it in some of your trainings and onboarding too.
I do have a question
Sure.
now, looking at it, just in semantics, I guess, gender, understanding his or her role as part of a school board. Do we want to keep it as his or her, or have more inclusive language?
I support having more inclusive language.
I do too. I think we've changed some of our policies to there.
I would support that recommendation to there. If, are there any other areas in this particular policy where we might just want to double check the language of it?
We can go through and double check, and then
Yeah.
how about if any of the policies have gender-specific language that could be easily changed to there, we could do that.
Okay. And
Of
because
the
that would
ones
be
we're
considered
reviewing.
a minor change, I
Yeah.
don't think we,
No.
need to. Thank you for bringing that up. And then the next one is Policy 210, Conflict of Interest, School Board Members. The purpose of this policy is to observe state statutes regarding conflicts of interest and to engage in school district business activities in a fashion designed to avoid any conflict of interest or the appearance of impropriety. And it goes through kind of a number of situations, and then it also talks about conflicts prior to taking office, and then kind of determining whether it is a conflict of interest. And again, we did adopt this one in 2022, so we're reviewing it to keep it in line. And again, a lot of legal references and cross-references and are on this one as well. Any comments or questions? This is something that I do know doing our school board training, and maybe your first couple trainings that you did with NSBA, they reviewed this as well. Any comments? Okay.
I just think it's a good policy, and sometimes self-monitoring is important on this one, just because we don't always know school board member relationships and things like that.
And when in doubt, always be asking, talking to the superintendent or the school board chair. Yeah. Okay. So the next policy is Policy 212, and there were a few minor changes here. School board member development. So we changed that and took out, and then the purpose is in recognition of the need for continuing in-service training and development for its members. The purpose of this policy, took out by law, is to encourage the members of the school board to participate in professional development activities designed for them so that they may perform their responsibilities. You'll see highlighted in D, all travel and development expenses for which the member intends to seek reimbursement from the school district should be pre-approved by the school board. You may recognize we often do a resolution at a school board meeting, and that's kind of fits this policy as well.
Maybe this is already clear. I just wanted to clarify that under this, for the attachments, I just wanted you to show the difference of what we had adopted and that we're reviewing and what MSBA had. Maybe you already knew that, other than like the bylaw part. So underneath that, I have the current, which includes that language that's highlighted, and the MSBA policy. But we weren't other than the bylaw, like you said, Chair Loeffler-Kemp, we're not suggesting any changes. And the next one is the same way.
And thank you for adding the current and the model policy on that. So any comments or questions on this one? And you can see when it was reviewed in 2018, there were no changes at that time. Okay, and then policy for review 213, school board committee bylaw. We're taking out bylaw, school board committees. The purpose of this policy is to provide for the structure and the operation of committees or subcommittees of the school board. Goes into the general statement. And again, this really is putting into practice what we're doing currently. And there was some cross references as well. And it was last updated in 2020. Any comments or questions on this one? And again, I understand, Patty, that what's right after it is the current policy, current, and then the model policy. Okay. Give you a minute if you have any questions.
And to clarify, these are our policy committee and our HR business finance committee is what these are referring to in our current practice, not the committees that we're assigned to as school board representatives to other community or district committees.
These are internal. There are times that the chair, because of a determination of the board, maybe will decide to form a subcommittee. I think of when we changed our board structure to do consent agendas and to change our 3 policies. We had formed an advisory committee appointed by the chair at the time. I happened to serve on that, and we met, we reviewed, and then we were advisors, so we brought back to the board. So it could include, as it does, a school board, the second one in there, a school board committee or subcommittee will be formed by the school board resolution, which shall outline the duties and purpose of the committee or subcommittee. Otherwise, yeah, it's our regular committees, our standing committees, I guess they would be called. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other comments on this policy? And that'll get us calling it a policy and not a bylaw, as well as bringing it up to what our practice is. And then the last one was just the informational, which was the facility use guide regulation. So we have reviewed all of our policies for this month. Any questions?
Thanks for the robust agenda.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that went into allowing us to have a robust policy. We do have a few other 200 series that we will be bringing in the next few months with the goal of having everything updated in the 200 series by the end of this year. So thank you again.
I also just noted that the MSBA came out with, or is coming out with, in a couple of days, a new model policy based on the legislative changes regarding student restraint. So that would probably be something that would be good for us to take up in our June meeting so that it's ready to go for handbooks or other needs.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I also saw that there was a note that they had a date of when we should hear about other legislative changes with policies. And that is the case with the 200 series too. You know, there are legislative changes at times with anything related to our 200, particularly around open meeting laws and things like that. So we may have it brought back to us. Thank you all. We'll have a couple minutes before we begin our committee of the whole, which is also very robust.